Thank you for coming. Welcome. I've done many book events. This is this year marks the 50th anniversary of, oh, Marcia, I'm seeing so many familiar friends. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the publication of my first book. I was 19, so you can do the math. I've done many book events. I have never gotten to do a book with my sister, book event with my sister Rona. This is a huge gift for us to be together. So we're definitely, Rona has a book out, Starter Dog, this summer. I have a book out, Bird Hotel. I'm sure we'll mention them at some point, and we'll hope that you read them. But really, we have a lot of other things to discuss. And Rona, where did you come from to get to Keene?
From Toronto.
Hey?
From Toronto. I lived there for many years and couldn't wait to get out of New Hampshire when I lived in Durham. But you know, on every trip back to this beautiful part of the world, I feel more attached to the landscape, the trees, the light on the water, the people, and I look around and I think this is the look of real country. The landscape in my head where everything begins is still New Hampshire. But I am thrilled to know that we have people with us today who have driven some distance to be here. We have Adrian, who has driven from Brooklyn, and Stephen has driven from Pennsylvania, and who else? Joyce?
Well, I was actually going to, Jeff, New York. So I have an award to present to the person who thinks they've come from the greatest distance. Jess, we could say you've come from Nevada. Who has come to this event from anywhere further than New York? So it might be New York City, Jeff, and I think you two might have the honors of your very own Bird Hotel Bird. Oh. So as you may know, if you've read the book or read about the book is set in a never named Central American country. But I do have a significant history in one Central American country, Guatemala, and so these are Guatemalan ceramic birds. I love it that here in Keene, we have a number of people who have been to Lake Atitlan, to my house. Can everybody raise their hand who's been to Guatemala here? This is probably the biggest Guatemala group that you'll ever see in Keene. Here's your bird. Where are you from?
Adrian, Brooklyn.
Oh, Adrian, Brooklyn. Adrian!
But is Brooklyn further? We need to Google that.
Luckily, I have a trip.
Oh.
Yes.
So we decided, Rona and I have not planned this at all, basically.
No, it's wing-a-ding-ding.
But we've actually been planning all our lives because it's not just a wild coincidence that the only two daughters in our family both became writers. You too, if you had grown up in our family, would have been a writer. You would not have had a lot of choice in the matter. And so I guess we really have to honor our mother, who deserved to have a career that she didn't get, being a wife and mother of the 50s, and decided to make sure that her daughters had a kind of access to the world that she didn't get. She did pretty darn well in the end, but our mother was the daughter of Russian immigrant Jews who came to Canada during the Depression, very poor, and were always the only Jewish family in a whole series of little towns in the prairies of Canada. And my mother was going to have a bigger life, and she got herself to college and then to graduate school and then to Harvard, Radcliffe in the 40s, and earned herself a PhD, summa cum laude, at Radcliffe and like so many women of her generation, could not get a job. She was not viewed as employable at the University of New Hampshire. So we were her career for some time.
And she did cobble together a very successful career, first as a magazine journalist for glossy women's magazines, and then she wrote 2 memoirs. They're out of print now, but they're worth tracking down online. You may be lucky enough to find some copies floating around. But my heart sinks for her a little bit that those wonderful books did not stay in print.
But both of our parents were people whose religion really was language. They had a huge portion of the Western canon committed to memory, my father the Bible also, and we were raised to respect language and to write. When some of you luckier people who got to have like happy, normal childhoods were out playing sports, we were writing, and we were having our work critiqued pretty assiduously. And we're speaking not at the age of 15, I'm talking about 6. And we actually, I believe we have at least one student of my father's here today. My father taught at UNH, my mother taught at Dover High. Any Maynard students besides the 2 of us? Yes! Whoa! Who? Dover High?
Yep.
What's your name?
I'm May. I was May La Rochelle at the time.
May and Janet Story. I remember your name. Well,
How about my sister, Lucy?
your
Tuttle?
sister Lucy Tuttle. Our parents were passionate teachers as well as lovers of books and language, but nobody got a stronger dose than we did, and it's one of the reasons why I teach writing, is to honor the lessons of my mother. But today we're going to talk about books, writing, being sisters.
And where are we going to start, Joyce? Shall we start with the books at hand?
Let's do that.
Let's do that.
Tell about yours, Rona.
When my husband said, let's get a dog, I thought, what a cockamamie idea.
You were how old at this point?
63. And I associated dogs with things I wanted no part of. Fur on the furniture, drool on the floor, difficulty traveling, and arguments over whose turn it was to walk the beast. We had been through all that as young parents, fighting over whose turn it was to wash the scrambled egg pan, and damned if I was going back. But he really, really wanted this dog. And I decided to say yes, very grudgingly, out of love for my husband. But I was not at all sure that I could love a dog. I thought I knew what I wanted.
I sometimes wondered if you could love a sister.
We'll talk about that. We'll get to that. Hold that thought.
Oh, she does.
Yeah. I do. Where was I? I wondered if I could love a dog, because what I wanted wasn't love. I thought, I've got enough love in my life. I need a big, complicated project to replace my big, complicated job. And it was going to be something I would wrestle to the ground with my thoughts and my words. A dog gambled through the door. I was in love. And a gateway opened up to a whole other way of being in this world. That's why it's called Starter Dog, not only because he was for the first dog, but for all the things he started.
Including, in some ways, a new chapter in our relationship.
Yes, you were the first one who noticed how I had changed.
It was kind of obvious. I've sometimes said to Rona, you never really talked about I know you love your son very much, but I never saw her go so crazy over her son as for her dog. And the book is a memoir that I will say, although I happen to be a dog lover, you don't have to be a dog lover to love this book, because really it's about a great deal more than the dog.
It is about those times in a full life where one chapter ends and you don't know where the next one begins, and you are frustrated and you are searching and you are crabby and you do not like your spouse very much and you certainly don't like yourself, how are you going to get out of this place? Well, for me, it was a dog. But I'm hoping that when you read this book, you will put a little of yourself in it and imagine what that next transformative thing might be for you, that gateway to another realm of the heart, the mind, and the imagination.
And actually, as you say that, I do see a connection between Starter Dog, although we didn't plan any of this, between Starter Dog and The Bird Hotel, which is a novel, not a memoir. It's, I think, my 11th novel. The Bird Hotel is very, for those of you who've read other books of mine, most of them are set in small New England towns. A couple of them have really been, I've been picturing Keene as I was writing them. This one is largely set in Central America, but the central character is a North American woman. I always say North American because, in fact, Guatemala is America, Mexico is America, Cuba.
Canada is America.
A North American woman who, named Irene, who experiences a devastating tragedy in her life. And I won't, of course, I'm not going to tell you what because I want you to read the book. This happens very early on in the book. She doesn't really care if she lives or dies. And not caring, she gets on a bus headed somewhere south, doesn't even know where, and ends up in this tiny little Mayan indigenous village on the shores of a very beautiful lake somewhere in Central America, surrounded by volcanoes. I happen to know such a place, and those of you who raised your hands know it also. It's my house in Guatemala, which I highly recommend visiting, and you can. We'll talk more about that. And I didn't really know, as I was writing this book, the piece of me that is in it. But I too, although thankfully I have never known the devastation of that this character experiences, I've had some pretty big wipeouts in my life and times that I had to sort of start all over and imagine a new way to be. The adjective resilient comes up in connection with me because I'm good at that. I'm good at coming back from hard things. And this character, Irene, lands in this tiny little village, is brought to this falling down, dilapidated hotel run by an old expat woman from Nebraska. She's the only guest at the hotel. And again, for reasons I'm not going to describe because I want you to read the book, she ends up running the hotel. And over the course of the years that follow, it is her. At first, she thinks she's just going to fix up the hotel so she can sell it as quickly as possible and continue with her miserable life. But gradually, she makes a new life in this village. And it's not all sunshine and roses and wonderful meals of tamales. Some very hard things happen in this village too. But she makes a new life. And she too opens up her heart again.
I think there's a real commonality between these books because they are both about finding the answer to the problem of your life where you least expected it.
Yeah. Which requires a certain open-mindedness and imagination. I think those are skills that you have to have as a writer too, and our characters have them.
Well, your characters grow. My character is me, and the character grows because the door in my mind was only slightly ajar. It definitely was not all the way open.
You want to read a little bit of Starter Dog, Rona?
Yes, I will read a short excerpt.
Can everybody hear okay?
Can you hear? Okay, good. This chapter is called The Imaginary Poop Patrol, and the only background that I'm going to give you to the chapter is that I was somebody who always had trouble saying, let's do it. My husband had said, let's get a dog, and I just tortured myself saying, okay. I could never say, let's do it.
I always say let's do it.
Why am I not surprised? One of the many differences between us. Okay. I've been thinking for a while about taking an improv course. After Casey made himself at home, I asked myself, why not now? I thought improv had something to do with acting, and I'd done a lot of that in my student days. Hey, I might have talent for this. What we really did in class was play games of transcendent silliness. Picture some dozen grown-ups bouncing around the studio, all of us shouting, yes, let's, to various unlikely ideas. Let's blow bubbles. Let's play basketball. Let's have a pillow fight. There weren't any bubble wands, basketballs, or pillows on hand, but that was the whole idea. You had to mime the action, rallying behind your classmates' whim of the moment. You didn't ask yourself, how am I doing, or compare your antics to anybody else's. I had to be the oldest person in the room, old enough to be the grandmother of the youngest. When my turn came to lead the tomfoolery, I yelled the first thing that came to mind. Let's pick up dog poop! Yes, let's, yelled the group as they stuffed imaginary baggies full of turds. They didn't know I'd gone dotty for a dog I had to be talked into getting. This game was my chance to exult in dottiness and shower sparks of it on my classmates. I'd walked to Second City in a fine drizzle that Sunday. I was thinking of someone I loved, a person in trouble. There had to be something I could do besides leave messages this person didn't answer. You won't always feel like this, I'd say. When I was young, I too had felt like this and couldn't imagine feeling any other way. I wished my words could plant the seed of a reason to live, which I would sprinkle with a watering can until the sprout pierced its stiff coat and followed the sun above ground. A seedling this tender should not be doused with a hose. A tear slid down my cheek, and then another. I wiped them with a wet hand. I left Second City feeling brighter, more hopeful. I still had a loved one in despair, but I could hold my sadness in one room of my mind and leave the others open to whatever feelings blew in. Amusement at the zaniness that bobbed around our classroom. Astonishment that any wild notion of mine could turn a band of strangers into an imaginary poop patrol. Back home, Casey broke into a dance at the sight of me. I didn't kid myself. He was craving dinner, not my company. He teetered on his hind legs and made as if to fly for the kibble as it cascaded into his bowl. Twice a day, the same familiar ecstasy. When I was a young working mother, at the nadir of my like this years, a psychiatrist talked some sense into me. She hectored and pontificated, but her method proved surprisingly effective. By working with tools I knew, words and ideas, I honed a more constructive way to think about my dilemmas. I became a firm believer in the power of talking to someone with diplomas on the walls. With Casey, I didn't analyze. I simply felt. Like blowing imaginary bubbles while screaming, yes, let's! It was a whole new way to be. Or should I say, a new way to be whole. Casey reached out to me with paws and nose and tongue. He pulled me into a realm of undiluted feeling. For the first time, I didn't much care what I thought or knew. Some things about being human can't be learned from your own kind.
We didn't plan this, but the page that I'm going to read from the Bird Hotel, although it's a work of fiction, kind of connects with that. This is page 1 of The Bird Hotel. The chapter is called, there are actually 100 chapters in this book. And the reason there are 100 chapters, I should say, is that I wrote this book during the early months of the pandemic, where I was in Guatemala. I had gone down there to teach my annual memoir writing workshop. I went probably the only week I could have gone. And I had no idea if anybody was going to come. Amazingly, some of the writers did come. And when the workshop ended and the world was changing around us, I invited 2 of the youngest ones, they were both 32, Shiren and Jenny, to stay on with me. I figured we'd be together for a few weeks at my house on the shores of Lake Atitlan. We ended up being there 6 months. 6, I have to say, of the most extraordinary months of my life. I recognized that the world was in great pain all around me, but we were having a really extraordinarily rich and precious time, and a very productive, creative one. So first I finished my novel, Count the Ways, and I read to them, I read to the girls, I called them, every night on the shores of the lake over our wonderful dinner of fish that some fishermen had brought up to the dock, and we cooked the fish in total silence. The stars were overhead, there was the lake, there was the volcano. Some of you know this site. And then I would read to them what I had read, what I'd written that day. And when I finished Count the Ways, we were still in Guatemala, so I felt there was nothing for it but to start a new book for the girls. So I think of this as their sort of their bedtime story, as my Arabian Nights, and there were many of them. So there are 100 little stories in this book, and this is the first one. I was 27 years old when I decided to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. One afternoon, I had this great life. Half an hour later, all I wanted was to be dead. I took a taxi. It was just after sunset when I reached the bridge, rising up through the mist, that wonderful shade of red I had loved back when I still cared about the colors of things and bridges and getting to the other side of them. Back when I cared about so many things that now seemed meaningless. Before leaving my apartment that last time, I'd stuffed a $100 bill in my pocket. I gave this to the driver. Why wait for change? There were tourists, of course, traffic heading in and out of the city, parents with children in strollers. I used to be one of those. A boat was passing under the bridge. From where I stood, preparing to jump, I watched it make its way under the pilings, men mopping the deck. Nothing made sense anymore. I'd been dimly aware of an elderly man watching me. He might try to stop me. So I waited for him to move on, and after a few minutes, he did. Only I couldn't take that last step onto the railing over the edge. One thing about hard times, Lenny had said once, when our rent check bounced the same week Arlo got sent home from daycare with head lice, and I came down with mono and a pipe burst in our apartment that destroyed a stack of drawings I'd been working on for 6 months. Once you hit bottom, things can only get better. Standing on the bridge, looking down at the dark and swirling water, I think I recognized something about myself. Even though the place in which I now found myself was terrible, some small part of me couldn't let go of the world. The fact of grieving a vast loss, as I did, had to serve as some kind of reminder that life was precious, even mine, even then. I stepped away from the railing. I couldn't do it. But I couldn't ever go home either. I had no home anymore. That is how I ended up at the Bird Hotel. So, 2 women starting over in different ways.
2 women surprising themselves, surprised by life, surprised by love.
You know, my favorite part of well, there is no event like this. I was going to say an event like this. My favorite part is always hearing from you. So we definitely want to hear your questions. But just to get the ball rolling, Rona suggested that we ask each other some questions, and we made a list. You want to ask me one, then I'll ask you one? You bring them up?
Let me open my phone first. No, actually, I can remember.
But open it up because I need to see them too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you envy about me? And then we're going to flip it.
Okay. I have so many things to say. She got there first. She got the better room in our house. But now I'll be serious. I'm sure there are many people who are siblings, and you're either the older one or the younger one. And if you're the younger one, the older one carved out their role in the family first. And then you pick up the pieces of what's left. Rona, and I'm sure you may argue this, Rona was a truth teller. Rona did not ever say anything she didn't mean. And some of what she said was pretty tough, including to our parents. She was never a nice girl, a good girl, a sweet girl. These were not adjectives applied to my sister. And I came along, and we lived in a difficult situation. Our father was an alcoholic. And as I'm guessing there are people in this room who grew up with some version of that situation. My job was to make everybody happy. And Rona definitely was not on that train. So I was working overtime to keep them happy, maybe make my father so happy he would forget about the vodka. That never happened. So I guess I'll have to say I envy you your having been able to be more truly yourself young. It took me a lot of years to feel that I could be, I was going to say bad, just real. My mother used to literally come to me and put her fingers in the corners of my mouth to make me smile because I was the one most likely to smile, and I always did.
She wouldn't get any smiles from me. Now, my role in that family was to distract attention from our father's drinking. I was what family therapists used to call the identified patient by lamenting my bad behavior and sour spirits. They were able to tell themselves that everything was okay between the two of them when it clearly was not. Now I'm going to tell you what I envy about my sister, and it's something that I have envied throughout adult life. Joyce has the most incredible, unquenchable sense of purpose and drive. She has kept at it in her writing career, and she's taken it very seriously as a career from the age of 18, and she doesn't have any truck with writer's block or conventional notions about inspiration.
If you say you have it, I'll be sympathetic and I'll help you, but I don't accept it in myself.
No, you don't accept it. Whereas I am a ditherer, a wool gatherer. There are 16 years between this book and Starter Dog. Now, I did other things. I did public speaking on mental health. I edited a big magazine, but it takes me, I've spent more time choosing a pair of shoes than she has spent choosing a house.
I thought you were going to say a partner.
And I would love to have some of that sense of purpose, frankly.
I thought you were going to say you envied my hair. Because there was a
when we were growing up, I think we each envied the other's hair.
As sisters do.
She had straight, fine hair that just hung, and all through our childhood, she was trying to curl it. She would use spoolies. Does anyone remember spoolies? And those little foam rollers that you got at the drugstore. And we actually have photos of her. They were taken in a real photo studio where she's got these god-awful half pin curls because she so wanted curls and didn't have them. Whereas I wanted straight hair, and I had hair that was every which way. It's very thick, it is very curly, and when I wanted hair like Joan Baez, it just wasn't happening, but you could have done that.
Next question. When you were growing up, what irritated you most about your sister? What irritated me most about you was that you didn't want to hang out with me very much.
What irritated me most about her was that she was being held up as a model for behavior. I should be more like her. And B, she took my stuff. I think older sisters everywhere have been screaming since time immemorial about their sister making off with, well, in the 17th century, maybe it was a hair ribbon. And in our house, it was a doll, or later a string of beads. And these feelings are exacerbated in a family where it seems there's not enough love, there's not enough confidence, there's not enough comfort to go around. So when you're a kid in that family, you feel that you have to fight for every scrap. I certainly did, and I did not like to share.
Okay, we have such good questions that I wanted. What's the most important thing you learned about writing from your mother, who happened to be my mother, too?
Writing should be music to the ear. When you write, you should hear it. The only way to teach somebody this is to do what our mother did, and that is to read aloud constantly from very good books. If you listen to the great children's authors of that era, Margaret Wise Brown, A.A. Milne, Robert McCloskey, they all had a sense of music.
In the great green room, there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of the cow jumping over the moon.
Or my favorite, born at sea in the teeth of a gale, the sailor was a dog. That's the same author, Margaret Wise Brown.
Yeah.
But she did not stick to kids' books. She was always reciting poetry from memory. And those of you who were her students, I'm sure, remember this habit that she had. She just couldn't contain her delight in English poetry, and she didn't really care if we understood it or not. It came out anyway. She baptized us in it.
There was always poetry. There was always poetry.
There was always poetry. There was always iambic pentameter, and the great meter of the English canon. And when she was angry with me because I was a mouthy adolescent, she quoted Milton to me, and it was the part where God casts Satan out of heaven for being a rebel. And Satan says, "Which way I fly is hell. Myself am hell." And I'm afraid I cannot go on from there because I do not have a doctorate in Milton from Radcliffe. But her point was, you're just complaining, you're like Satan, you're too big for your britches, and you're making your own hell. And the last line of that passage is, the mind is its own place and can make a hell of heaven and a heaven of hell.
Incidentally, Rona now fills the role in my life that our mother used to, because Rona has an extraordinary memory for poetry. And
not really.
I used to call up our mother and say, give me a line about, and she always could, or what's that line? And
Yeah, she would know I misquoted that passage.
What's your favorite example of bad advice to writers? I've got a few great ones. Maybe I'll start it out because I know them right off.
Okay, you start
Okay,
out.
one is just doesn't matter. You can fix it up later. Just vomit on the page. And what I say to writers who attempt this is, vomit on the page, edited, only becomes slightly cleaned up vomit on the page. You cannot take vomit on the page and make it into art. And I believe in a certain amount of plan and decision making before you write, rather than just dumping it out. And actually the simplest thing to sort of know what you're telling before you write, which is very different from that bad English teacher advice, which used to be, first say what you're going to say, then say it, then say what you just said, which sounds incredibly boring to me.
Well, I often don't know what I'm going to write when I sit down. Isn't that interesting? Maybe that's why you enjoy writing much more than I do. But I have I've acquired a loathing for all hard and fast rules that are given to writers. For example, writers are told, and our mother would say this, never ever use the passive voice when the active would do. And I practiced this rule myself for years and years. I flinched every time I saw the passive voice. The passive voice, by the way, is mistakes were made. Then I became aware that there are times in writing when you want to show that it is ambiguous who did what to whom. You want to be very deliberate about that. And you can add a whole other world of nuance sometimes by using it. That's just one example of the rules that appear on rule lists for writers. And in the beginning, if you follow those rules, you will write better. But you get to the point where it's time to start selectively breaking them for effect.
And I have to say, just as a sort of postscript to that although I give a lot of thought before I sit and write, I don't know ever how a book is going to end. And that is part of what keeps me so excited while I'm writing, and why I hop out of bed at 5 a.m. to get back to my laptop, because I can't wait to see what my characters are going to do next. That part is the adventure and discovery. But before I get to that part, that I've just completed, like 2 days ago, the sequel to my novel Count the Ways, and I spent a full year and a half just thinking about that book, thinking about those characters, and what should happen before I put a word on the page. What's the next question?
Can you think of a moment when you knew that you were going to be a writer?
Oh, I never intended to be a writer. I intended to get out of the state of New Hampshire. That was what I intended. Which, as Rona has said, keeps pulling us back. I wanted to hit the big city. I wanted to be an actor, a movie star, singing in the backup of a rock and roll band. I wanted to be out on the stage doing something where everybody would be seeing me and clapping for me, and I'd be putting on fancy outfits. This is not a writer's life at all. I simply saw that writing was something I knew how to do, and it could be my ticket to New York City, at which point I would move on to phase 2. I'm still waiting for phase 2, but it snuck up on me. I think it snuck up on me when I wrote my column Domestic Affairs. I was married, living in Hillsborough, not too far down the road, raising 3 children on our farm, a non-working farm, I should say, in Hillsborough. And I needed to earn a living, and that was the thing I was going to be able to do. And I started writing a weekly syndicated newspaper column about our life. I couldn't go anywhere. I had 3 very little children, but I wanted to approach the story of being in a family and raising a family and being in a marriage as if I were a reporter on a really important scene. Because so often the lives of women in particular in families are relegated to the unimportant, the domestic. I wanted to look at the big important questions that come up when you're living a life with children and living a life in the kitchen and the home. And so I published this column that was, I like to think, very different from a lot of what was being written about families and child raising at the time. It wasn't just all the cute things my kids said and, the soccer mom stories of, having a carpool and, somebody's peanut butter sandwich lands on the upholstery. I wanted to look at the hard truth that as much as one adores one's family, being in a family is hard. And I thought a lot in writing that column about how it felt for me growing up in my family with a big secret that our father got drunk every night and never speaking those words and thinking, I really did believe I was the only person on the face of the earth whose father got drunk. I didn't know it was a thing that happened. So I was full of shame and very isolated. I had to keep that secret. And in domestic affairs, that was the moment that I first really was an honest woman about the truths of my life. My no longer perfect, all-American girl, spokesperson of her generation voice, but the tough things about being a parent and being in a marriage. And I did that column for 9 years. I loved that job. Every Monday morning, whatever was going on in my life, I had to deliver that column. And the great gift of the column was hearing back from hundreds and hundreds of readers, maybe you. And if you didn't write back, I knew you were there and you felt like friends. And I was silently giving a message, you're not alone. If sometimes you just want to get in the car and drive, 100 miles an hour in the opposite direction and just have a day to be alone or whatever thing mothers are not supposed to feel like in their endless self-sacrifice for their families, I wanted to talk about those things too. So I would say that was the moment that I stopped sounding like our mother when I wrote, and I started sounding like me. I wrote the column for 10 years, and around about year 7, my children's father and I got a divorce, and half of the newspapers that were running that column dropped the column on the grounds. One editor said it in Chicago. Joyce Maynard isn't married anymore. She's not equipped to write about family. That was the United States of America in the year 1990. I did keep on writing it, and I think I wrote some of my best columns in those later years because I was dealing with some very hard things. But there came a point where my children were not of an age where it was a good idea to be writing about their lives, our life. And that's really when I started writing novels in a serious way, which also was this great discovery that I could actually love writing. For a long time, I wrote to please our mother.
The pressure to please our mother and win awards and publish and meet or surpass the benchmark that had been set last year was so afflicting that when I grew up, I decided I wanted to be anything but a writer. I wanted to grind writing under my shoe, and I set my sights on an editing career. I chose magazines, and I eventually did rise to editor-in-chief of Chatelaine, which is the premier magazine for women in Canada. I did that for 10 years. And as an editor, you are the one who tells the staff and the contributors whether it's good enough. You occupy this position of power, and you're the one who sends them back to rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it again. So I wasn't a writer, but I kicked writers' butts every day. And I did write an editorial that became a destination page for our readers because it was not about what's in this issue and why you should read it. It was a little essay about my life as a woman in these times. It was hugely popular, but I still didn't think of myself as a writer. After I left that job, I wrote the one book that I thought I had in me, and it was this book, My Mother's Daughter, How I Became Myself, My Own Woman, because of, but also in spite of, the woman who formed me. And I felt all written out. I remember I was getting a business card printed and my friend said, well, I guess it's going to say Rona Maynard writer. And I said, no, because I'm not a writer. I'm just someone who writes when she has something to say. So what is a writer really? I think I now know the answer to that question.
I'm waiting to hear.
A writer is someone who goes somewhere or sees something or remembers something and is already associating this thing that is foremost in front of her eyes or in her memory with other things that will add up to a story. You cannot help but think that way if you are a writer. And you have a choice. You can be a writer who writes down what comes to you, or you can be a writer who doesn't write it and is always carrying that stone of regret that you're not telling the story. And that is who I was for.
And do I ever have a workshop for you? If you're
That is who I was for many years. I'm also a perfectionist, which doesn't help. And I did a blog for many years, but I didn't think that was really writing. And I did Facebook posts about my wonderful dog, Casey. That's how this.
If you're
book
not
was.
Rona's Facebook friend, you owe it to yourself to become. Rona writes real essays and posts them on Facebook.
So I was writing about Casey, and people started saying, "You've got a book," and and lo and behold, I did, and I began the work, and it was much harder than I ever imagined, of quilting these little squares of this and that into a book. And at 70, I looked at my husband and I said, I think I've decided what I want to do with the rest of my life. I want to be a writer. And he looked at me as if to say, this is news.
Can we see some more questions?
Yes. Whoops. Is writing fun?
It's a weird kind of fun. I'll describe to you what my summer has been like. And we all are, I'm guessing most of us are New Hampshire or in New England. Summer is so precious. And I at the beginning of summer, when it's May and it's all in front of me, I think, oh, I've got the whole summer to work on my zinnias and swim and take hikes. And this summer, I haven't had a summer. I have been up at 5 every morning, going to my desk. Luckily, it was raining a lot, and spending probably 12 hours, sometimes longer, working on a book. Is that fun? And the answer actually is, it has been a weird kind of fun. I barely ate, I barely saw human beings. I hope I'm not too wired up today because I'm still it's exciting being out in the world. I really haven't been out in the world this whole summer. I've been at my desk, but I've been with my characters. I wasn't alone. I was waiting to see what they would do next. And I was reading out loud, that thing that Rona talked about, the music of it. I was sitting alone in this room, reading out loud the sentences that I'd read and hearing the rhythms of it. And that's my idea of a fun time.
Well, I do not think writing is fun. I think writing is frustrating and slow, and I always feel I usually feel it, I'm grinding it out until I fall in love with what I am writing, and that is exciting, that is fun. What I particularly love about writing, and it doesn't happen very often, is when I feel I have outdone myself, when I have set out to write something that I wasn't sure I could pull off, and I do. And there's a chapter like that in Starter Dog, and all I'm going to say about it is that it is an encounter in the present day with a friend who had died many years before. And I did not know if I could make that work, but by God I did, and I'm very proud of it.
I mean, writing accomplishes so many different interesting things at different times in your life. There was a time when I was writing Labor Day. It was a really low time in my life. My career was going very badly after the publication of my memoir, At Home in the World. Some of you know that story. I was kind of a canceled writer at that point. And then I got a wonderful residency at MacDowell, and I was holed up in this little cabin, and I decided, I had no partner. I'd been divorced for many years. I had no partner. I decided, what's going to make me really excited about getting to my laptop every morning at 5 a.m.? I'm going to create the most wonderful man. And then I get to spend my day with this wonderful man. He happened to be an escaped convict, incidentally, not unlike some other people that I dated over the years, but better, more lovable. And I made this passionate love affair between the escaped convict and a woman who bore a certain resemblance to me as a lonely single mother of a son living in a little town that looked a lot like Keene. And he comes up to her in the Walmart, and she's back to school shopping, and he has blood coming down his head, but he says, could you possibly take me over to your house? And she says, okay. She's not like Rona, she's like somebody else up here. So yeah, I get to live lives that I never got to live. I've gotten to be old, young, male, female, a murderer, lots of different people, and that to me is wonderful fun. Bird Hotel was probably some of my best fun. Anytime I didn't know what more to do, I just had a new person check into the hotel, and there was another story.
Let's go back to sisters.
Okay.
Did our parents have a favorite?
Who hasn't asked this question? I have, actually, my favorite child is there right now. Her mother is here, and I know she's not going to tell.
Well, I'm going to answer that question first. I often thought that my sister was the favorite because she was the nice one, the chirpy one, and the one who had the power to make them happy for a little while until the next outburst. But I had something that was more important to me. I don't think I really wanted to be the favorite. I wanted to be respected. And I was. They were both a little bit afraid of me. I had the power to tell it as I saw it, and I would use that power, and I was not going to give it up in order to be liked. I am still...
Wonder who did.
I am still like that, but it is a very lonely position. I did not feel that I belonged in our own family, and then when I went to school, I certainly didn't feel that I belonged there. So there really was no place for me.
I couldn't add much to it. I agree. I think you were the respected one. You were the respected one.
And there were a lot of invidious comparisons that went on in the family. Like Rona's the sullen one, Joyce is the kind, happy one. But there was also, Rona is honest to a fault, Joyce is devious.
You just keep your eye on your wallet.
Yes. Yes, she was thought to be light-fingered, and I'm not sure if it was true. Were you light-fingered?
Well, I every now and then there probably was a string of beads that I liked in your room. I don't think I was a big.
No, did you take money out of wallets? That's.
Oh, I don't
I think
remember
you
that.
or off Daddy's desk. I think that stuff may have happened, and they knew that I would never have done it. So
It was always me.
if any money went missing, it was her.
And incidentally, the favorite question for me applies to my books as well. I'm often asked, do you have a favorite book? And I have a lot of books. I don't have a favorite book, but I often compare it to my children. There are different things I love about the different books and children, and different moments when one seems more lovable and one less. So yeah, I don't think, I think our parents, made some grievous mistakes as parents, and some were very costly to us, but we did feel loved. We did feel loved. And
Yes.
I don't think I ever doubted that.
Yes, I felt loved, but love in the Maynard family was like your salary. You get the love no matter what. If you are on staff at Maynard Company. But there's also the year-end bonus. And to get the year-end bonus, you better achieve. So I never felt that love was quite enough in that family, and that if I got a national publication, and I did at the age of 15 in Ladies' Home Journal, that is a story I tell in this book, then the pressure is on, how am I going to keep this up? What happens if I can't do it again? What happens if Joyce decides that she's going to do it? The reason that Joyce began publishing as early as she did was to keep up with me in the beginning.
Well, and to make our mother happy, I
Yes.
would say. There is a Yiddish word that I always think of in connection with that event in our lives, that need to lay success at our mother's feet.
Nachas.
Nachas. It's nachas. It is the success she deserved that she didn't get, and it was our gift to her that we should receive it.
And it was very embarrassing the way she would kfel about it. Another Yiddish word that means to exalt.
And I probably should say, I want to get to your questions just about now, but our mother died rather young. It was very surprising because she seemed like a person who was going to live forever. She was a very sturdy person. She just didn't get sick. She didn't stop. And then she was diagnosed with a glioblastoma, a terminal brain tumor, when she was just 66 years old. Astonishing event. I love the first thing that she said. I don't love anything about this event, but it fell to me to tell her. Rona was away, and I flew to Toronto, and she said, "What's the matter with me?" She'd been rushed to the hospital. She collapsed, and she said, "What's the matter with me?" And I said, "Mom, you have cancer." And she said, "What are they going to do about it?" And I said, she was 66. How young that was. 3 years younger than I am now. I said, "Doesn't look like there's anything they can do about it, Mom." And she said, "You mean I'm going to die?" And I said, "Yeah, probably." And her first words of response, so like her, were, "Isn't life interesting?" Even death was interesting. Our mother was curious and did instill that in us, that life was interesting. It might not
Definitely.
be fun, it might not be happy. Those were not necessarily the things that we were taught to most aspire to, happiness, but an interesting life, a rich, fulfilling, creative life.
Absolutely.
I want to hear from you. And I'm sure this is not a crowd. I see so many old friends and new friends that I don't know, but if you are a reader, you're a friend to me. Who'd like to start it off? It doesn't have to be Stephen.
Great, love hearing you too. This is great. Do you ever read each other's manuscripts and give like thoughts in advance when things are still fluid and can be changed?
Yes.
When?
Yes. I remember that it doesn't happen a lot,
No.
but I remember
I'd be terrified.
that you were thinking of making a change to the beginning of the Bird Hotel, and you asked me if I thought it worked. And I said, no, it doesn't.
Oh,
And that was all.
and that's not the chapter. That's not how it opens now.
It was something, you were concerned that maybe the character didn't have enough agency, and you wanted the character to seem a little stronger, and you changed it.
I have no memory of that.
And I did not think this was a good idea. And when I was writing Starter Dog, I had a manuscript and I was really laboring with it. I couldn't figure out how to end it. A number of things weren't working. And I sent it to her, and not asking what should I do with this, but just, what do you think? Is this alive? Is this worth pursuing? And she loved it, and she was
But we've
very
already determined
complimentary
that
about
I'm
it.
devious and insincere and.
And there wasn't any money on the line.
It is a rare event. I will say it is a rare.
It is a very rare event. I don't often ask people to read work in progress ever. That is probably something that I should change. But when I do ask, usually I want to know, is it working, is it not working? I only want very, very high level comments.
Other thoughts, other questions? Becky.
I just, I love going to your book events, but this, I just wanted to say, probably on behalf of all of us, to see the two of you together is such a treat that I would not have wanted to miss.
It is for us too. And we are not, there are these women who say, oh, my sister is my best friend, we go, we get together every week and have, talk forever. No, I've had to look up my sister's phone number. There were many years where we barely spoke. In fact, we had a real falling out over the death of our mother, and our different, I was 35, Rona was 39. I don't know what a good age is to lose your mother, but
There isn't one.
There isn't one. And we experienced that with so much pain and isolation from each other that it was years before. Actually, the event really, I would say, that brought us back together was some years later. I suggested to a magazine that I wrote for at the time, no longer exists, it's a magazine called More, that each of us write an essay about being the sister to the other. And the editor gave only one ground rule, which was that we should not consult each other on these essays. That was not difficult to follow because we didn't talk to each other at that point. And
Yes, we did.
very little, very little.
I think you're exaggerating. I don't think that's
She's a
true.
truth teller. She tells the truth.
Okay, there wasn't, I felt
It certainly wasn't.
there was
we
an
certainly-
open wound that had not been healed, which had to
Okay.
do with the death of our mother.
Okay.
And each of us wrote that same story of the period, the summer that our mother was dying, and I came to Toronto to help take care of her. And each of them was, and we each described the event that had really torn us asunder. And it was for the first time that this is also an exercise for writers. I do sometimes use this when I teach. Look at point of view. It is not that there is a truth. There is your truth. Both essays were true, and they both described two very different women's experience of losing their mother over that summer. And that really, to me, that was sort of the beginning of finding our way back. But what a gift it has been. Our parents have been long dead, and our mother, 34 years now. I will be 70 in November, you'll be 74. in October. What an extraordinary gift. And many women have written to me to say, I have a sister that I don't speak to, and it now feels like, one of the most important relationships to have. Marriages may come and go, many other things may come and go, but you do not divorce your sibling. Your sibling is there. Your sibling is the only other person who understands what it was like to have those parents. And that's huge.
One pivotal moment for me, well, not moment, passage, was after Joyce's husband, Jim, died, and I went to visit for a few days in California, and I was able to be a comfort to Joyce and be with her at a difficult time. Now, she was not weeping, she was not on the floor. Some months had passed since Jim's death, but when there's been a death in a family, to have another family member with you as you walk forward is important. And it meant a lot to me that I was able to fill that role, even though I don't think we talked that much about Jim.
I have to tell a story from that visit. And I agree, that was a wonderful visit. So you know that I'm telling this story in love.
Oh, I don't.
Okay.
I wonder what story this will be.
So Rona has come from Toronto, and the first thing that had to happen was that I had to vacate my bed because she was a very particular sleeper. So I gave her my bed. Does anybody have a chair? I gave her my bed, and she wanted to see the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art that had recently reopened. And it wasn't my top priority to go to the museum, but I knew it was really important to Rona. So we were going to drive into San Francisco, and I had many other things going on. I was racing around. I think the gas had run out in my house, and there was a leak, and there were all kinds of, I'm sure there was a raccoon living somewhere. And I was racing around. Rona was standing by my car. I never care that much about my car. So my car contains everything that I've noticed in the world that I might want to pick up in the last 3 years. So my car, it had a lot of stuff in it. It was a 1995 Honda Civic. It was my storage vehicle, basically. And Rona's standing there perfectly groomed, wearing a hat and practically gloves. She was immaculately groomed. And I'm racing around. Hair's a mess. Everything's a mess. And I come running out, and Rona is standing. You don't remember this? Rona's standing next to my car, and she has something in her hand. And I realize it's a rock. And then I remember that about 4 years earlier, I'd seen that rock on a hike, and I thought that was a nice rock, and I put it in my car. And it had been in my car ever since. But now she's taken it out of the car. You still don't remember this?
Oh, now I remember.
And she said, this rock. This is how two people have different memories. She's
Yes,
holding
now I
this
remember
rock,
it.
and she's holding it out, and she says, what should I do with this rock? And I say, I don't know, put it back in the car. I didn't know what the answer. And she said, but it's a projectile. Now, incidentally, she got her physics wrong, which I understood what she was thinking. We'd be driving over the San Francisco Bay Bridge. I might put my foot on the brake very suddenly, and the rock would come back and hit her in the head and kill her.
I thought it would kill you. You've been driving with this rock in your car for years. It's a wonder you're alive.
So either way, anyway, this was the saving. This is so unlike. I said, Rona, my husband just died of pancreatic cancer. You think I'm caring about a rock? And this is what saves us always, which is a sense of humor. That we both burst out laughing because we knew how completely differently we viewed the world. To me, it was an interesting rock. To her, it was a projectile that could kill her.
No, I wasn't thinking about me. I was thinking about you driving around with a rock Not taking
Oh,
care of
see,
yourself.
oh,
No, I thought,
Like maybe one of those hitchhikers she's always picking up might have picked it up and smashed her.
I hadn't thought of that. But yes, it could be a weapon wielded by a dangerous passenger.
there are actually, I have very fond memories of that trip too.
Yes, it was a great trip. Would anybody else like to ask a
Oh,
question?
please, it's my favorite. Yeah, what's your name? You look familiar, but
Jenny, we met in Peterborough.
I thought so. Jenny? Yeah.
Are you guys considering doing a project together?
Yes, funny you should ask.
We absolutely are.
Jenny's question was, are we considering
Oh, I heard it.
together? For any years.
Your mic is off.
Are we going to do a project together? Yes, we are planning to write a book together about being sisters. How about that? The fabulous Maynard sisters.
Rona did point out we better get moving on this book.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time.
We're in good health, but you know. Other questions? Yes. Which you're also.
Yes, I saw you in Keene.
I know. Yeah.
Good to see you again.
Your name?
Carolyn,
Carolyn. Yeah.
have you seen Barbie?
No, I've been finishing a book. I haven't had a life.
You need to go with your sister.
Oh, really?
I'd like to know your thoughts.
I've been to Barbie.
As women, okay.
I've been to Barbie, and I very much enjoyed it. I particularly loved the opening riff on 2001, and I will not say anything about it except that it was terribly clever and made me laugh out loud. I felt it ran out of steam a little bit toward the end, but I definitely enjoyed it and recommend it.
My goal is basically to keep you up all night and turning the pages.
And I do not think at all about having my work made into a movie. In fact, when my husband said, what if it becomes a movie, I thought, you couldn't film this book, it's much too interior. But actually, I think you could. It would be quite a quirky little film, but yes, it could happen. And meanwhile, we have a little joke in our house. Whenever it would be nice to enjoy something that's really expensive, we begin the sentence with, when Spielberg calls.
And actually, I had a similar line. There were a couple of years there where my book To Die For was optioned for a movie. It hadn't been made. That's a stage in the process where a studio expresses an interest and pays a small amount of money that will become a much bigger amount of money if they make the book. And the book was under option while we lived in Keene, and a lot of rather difficult, expensive things were going on. And my refrain to my children was, and Audrey may even remember this, if our ship comes in. And sometimes it would look like the ship came in. Meg Ryan said she was going to play the part in To Die For. The ship was coming into port. Meg Ryan changed her idea, and the ship went out of port again. And then Nicole Kidman brought the ship into port, and I took my kids out for dinner. They were so excited because now the ship had come in, and all those bicycles and things that I'd been promising, we're going to make a basketball court in our garage, in our driveway, were finally going to happen. And I sat them down. We went to a nice restaurant that I think, Marcia, you were the waitress of in those days. And we sat down, and I took the amount of money. Do you remember this, Audrey? And I began chipping away at all the things that the money had to go to pay. And by the end, there was about $52 left. And I saw their faces sort of fall. But yes, there is always, it's a bonanza for a writer when a movie gets made, and even more so if it's a good movie. And I feel really lucky that One, I think, extraordinary movie was made, To Die For, which really holds up. I think it's a classic. And Labor Day is a nice movie. And there is actually somebody here today from Miller's Falls, where the film was shot. I'm so sorry that Labor Day, which is a New Hampshire story, couldn't be filmed in New Hampshire because New Hampshire doesn't give film credits. But Labor Day was filmed over the border in Shelburne Falls and Shelburne Falls and in Concord, Mass. Audrey, my daughter, was kind of put out because the character lives in a very beat-up house, and the paint is peeling off, and it's, you know, she doesn't have any money, and she's a single mom, and times are tough. And when they actually filmed the movie, I think this part was in Concord, Mass., at great expense to the movie studio, they took a really nicely painted house and they made it all bad. And Audrey said, all you had to do was go to New Hampshire. There are a million of those. Yes, what's your name?
Ingrid.
Ingrid, yes, Ingrid, hi.
I am wondering, aside from each other, what contemporary authors really do it for you?
Well, I was just thinking about an author who is a fairly recent discovery. S.A. Cosby is a black Southerner who writes noir fiction, noir crime fiction. And he is funny, he is fast-paced. It's like watching a Quentin Tarantino movie in your head. I happen to like Quentin Tarantino. And I listen to these in the car with my husband. I recommend him highly. There's some overwriting that I try to ignore, but great, great fun. And one of my favorite books ever is by Abigail Thomas, the wonderful memoirist on the subject of life, dogs, and age. It is called What Comes Next and How to Like It.
The book that I've been talking about this summer, and I have to say I'm so much less well-read than my sister, but there's a novel that I have been recommending this summer by Andre Dubus III called Such Kindness. Have you read it? It's a beautiful, beautiful novel. And I love all of his work, a memoir called Townie. Grew up in Lowell, Mass. And his father was also a great writer, short story writer, Andre Dubus II. So that's my bit. But I'm a really slow reader. I bet just about everybody in this room is better read than I am because of that. But when I find a book I love, I really love that book. Yeah, Bob.
Did either of you see the movie Genius?
No.
It's about the life of Maxwell Perkins.
Aha, the editor.
Edited everybody.
This is, Bob has mentioned a movie Genius about the life of Maxwell Perkins. Was it by any chance based on Scott Berg's biography of Perkins?
Good question. I don't know.
I imagine that is highly likely. Wonderful biography. I've read it twice.
Well, the point I want to talk about in this movie is that he edited F. Scott Fitzgerald and Thomas Wolfe. And Thomas Wolfe was extremely prolific, and F. Scott would hit the wall all the time. And he was entertaining F. Scott at home. And Thomas Wolfe comes running up, knocking on his door, "You're not paying attention to me." And he said, "Thomas," he says, "how many words did you write today?" "Oh, 3,000 or 4,000. He said, "Scott couldn't write 5 words today."
If you want to understand writers and writing, the biography of Maxwell Perkins, it's called Maxwell Perkins, editor of Genius, is well worth reading.
Does he mention Dawn, the novelist Dawn, that Hemingway thought was a terrific writer in that group, Max Perkins?
Oh, this is a deep biography.
Yeah.
Everybody Perkins worked with.
Well, this lady was a 30s writer.
Oh,
Dawn.
I know the one you mean.
Yes.
Yes, but I've forgotten her name. And she wrote about New York in the 30s,
Yes.
the publishing community. Dawn Powell.
Yes. Now
I'm just aware of the time, Bob.
here's the last line. Dawn Powell was as tough as they come. And she and her husband fought like hell and drank and separated to get back together. And he dies. And a friend sees her on the street and tries to commiserate with her. She's smoking a cigarette. She's telling her, I'm so sorry about your husband. She takes the cigarette out of her mouth. She says, we've been through worse.
The movie is based on the Berg biography. Just
I want to ask this group because I'm looking at the time and it's so much fun for us, but we should close things out. But I want to ask. I'm guessing there are people here in this room who write or who want to write, who secretly want to write. You might say, "Oh, but I'm not a writer." But are there some writers in this room? I am a proselytizer for telling your story. And I don't believe everybody has to do it, and you can do it in your head and not put it on paper. But I want to say, I want to urge you to not hold the standard of, did I get A's in English? Have I read enough books? Do I have similes and metaphors? Do you have a story? Is there a story you burn to tell? And it doesn't have to be about your, famous great-grandfather who climbed Mount Everest, blind and deaf and with one leg. It is a human story. I've been teaching memoir now in various places, sometimes New Hampshire, very often Guatemala, sometimes California, for over 25 years now. And it has been a gift in my life to help other people. A few of them are here today.
Remember the Maine.
To tell their story. And I so believe, as a person who's been lucky enough to tell hers and was given the tools to tell it well, that it's a transformative event, whether you ever, my standard is never did it get published or not. My standard is, do you feel you told your truth? And your life will be changed by doing that.
And I would add, even if you never publish it, and most writers do not succeed in getting their work published, there are people in your family, there are descendants of yours who will be very glad that you wrote this story. So think about it, don't sit on it. Memories fade over time. The longer you wait, the harder it will be to remember. But please,
unless you have a
do it.
sister like mine who remembers everything, who actually wrote
Not
an
true.
essay about my birth. She was 4 years old and 1 week when I was born, but she could remember.
When your world falls apart,
We're going to sign books. If you don't have a book to sign, still come and say hello. That's great. We'd love to see you. Thank you so much for coming. And I can't wait to be back here with the next book and with my sister when we go on the road.
Yeah, it's a real show.
Rona, whatever happens, after the birth of Joyce, you can just say, I've been through worse.